You ever top 8 a national card tournament while 6 months pregnant with limited bathroom breaks and lots of nausea and opponents who don't really get what your body's going through? No one? Just me? I'm here to talk about what it's like to be a woman in card gaming. I have spent a lot of time playing cards. I started off in high school. I played some Magic. Wasn't my favorite experience. That's nothing against Magic players, but Magic was not my card game. Then once I got to college, I met husband and we started playing the WoW TCG. And eventually, because he played competitively and I started playing competitively with him, I realized that I have a slight competitive streak. Whoops. I started to really enjoy playing competitive card games. We started with the WoW TCG. I did qualify for nationals, but I was still pretty new to the card game scene at the time. After that, we dabbled around with a few card games, and then eventually we found a game called Lightseekers. Lightseekers was one of my favorite games. It had cute little chibi monsters and it was adorable and I loved it. And I managed to find a way to become highly competitive in the Lightseekers scene. Eventually, I qualified for nationals at Gen Con. That year, I managed to make top 8 of nationals and I was so excited. However, I was also 6 months pregnant and very, very large, or at least in my mind, very, very large and ready to burst. And one thing I will say, however much I love playing competitive card gaming, when I looked at the other top 8 of US Nationals for Lightseekers, I realized I was the only woman there, and that has happened more than a few times. And that is one of the reasons why I wanted to address what it's like to be a woman in gaming, especially card gaming today. I don't think it's any secret that card gaming especially happens to be dominated, a lot of it, by men. You see lots of men at every event, which is great. I love that lots of guys come out, but I wish personally that I could see a lot more women come out and feel comfortable card gaming. That is one of the reasons why I'm excited about Lorcana and why I wanted to talk about this, because I think with Lorcana, we are going to see more women in gaming. And I think that's exciting and wonderful, but I don't want them to fall into any of the same pitfalls that I fell into at the beginning when I first started competitive gaming. Lots of times I would come into an event and be one of the only women at the event. And you would sit down across an opponent and they would assume I or another woman are casual players, or that we're only there because of our spouses, boyfriends, significant others, best friends, etc. Whereas I can say immediately for Lightseekers, I was the one usually dragging husband to these events because I was so obsessed with Lightseekers. And I have a feeling we're both going to be mutually dragging each other toward Lorcana events. Now, I really like to play competitively, but I do think it is worth noting it is hard to be a woman in card gaming. I have had people question every single move I made as to whether or not it was legal because I was a woman. I've had people extremely surprised when I beat them, which honestly felt a little good. I've had people flip tables because they were convinced that I had to have cheated. I have had people yell and scream and storm out of events because they couldn't handle losing to a girl. Those are the realities of what I have faced and what I know other women have faced in the past. I've also had judges who have conveniently had to check my deck every single round to make sure it was legal, even though it had been checked the round before of the same event. In the 20 some odd years I've been playing card games, the 15 odd years that I've been playing competitively, yes, I'm old, I have seen a wonderful shift toward being more welcoming to women in the card gaming experience, but I do think that there is still room to go. I could fill up my personal experiences and experiences of friends of mine in a book, which maybe I'll do later. Maybe I'll talk about these things later. But what I really want to talk about is how excited I am as a woman in gaming to be joining the Lorcana community, because already, even though we've really only had one weekend of events, I'm seeing a definite shift that I am incredibly excited for. Last weekend, I accompanied my husband to Gen Con, and thanks to our wonderful friend Dan, I was able to play in one of the starter deck tournaments. I was really excited because for the first time in a while, I was able to see a lot of other women at the gaming table, which is not something that's been the norm for a lot of the events that I've been able to go to in the past. I think Lorcana is going to be a wonderful, welcoming community. There were lots of women, some new card players, some who were just there for the fun of it, lots of Disney people, which made me very happy because even though my husband is not a huge Disney person, I am. My sister works for the mouse. It kind of has to go in the family. Even though I scrubbed, I still feel like I got a good conversations in with my opponents, with some opponents around me, and I'm really excited for what it shows for the future. No one immediately assumed that I was there because of my spouse, which sounds like a little thing, but it actually felt really nice. I had great conversations about card gaming in general, about what our local stores are going to be like, and I was able to talk to some other women who are hoping to really pilot this game at their local stores. Another great thing about my opponents, a few of them, I had to make some corrections to things they did. They had to make some corrections to things I did. And no one got really salty about it. Now, granted, it was Gen Con. The atmosphere was pumping. Life was great. People had mostly gotten over all of the drama that happened on Thursday. Mostly. But no one got salty when I was correcting or when they needed to correct something I did. Granted, we are all still learning the game. It's still new to a lot of us. But it felt really nice to be in a welcoming and kind of an atmosphere where everyone's trying to basically mutually build on each other and build each other up, even though we're competing. It felt really, really great. I really hope that the future of Lorcana has a lot of women in it. There seemed to be a decent amount of women at these starter events, and that was just Gen Con, which is great, except it's a very small community well, not small community, but it was a very small number of people who were able to get into the event. And I'm excited to see what it brings out in the future. I'm already seeing posts and videos from other women content creators who are trying to build a Lorcana community for them. And I think that it is wonderful to see how many women are interested in Lorcana. My hope is that as Lorcana continues, the community stays as welcoming as it was to me and the other women who were at this event. And my hope for the community is that we are able to bring in more women who maybe only dabbled in card games, or maybe they are nervous about going to a card store for the first time without a significant other, or maybe just people who are interested but have never had that ability to really look into things more in depth than they could before. I think the Disney license is a huge help for that because I am a Disney adult. I'm okay with being a Disney adult. My students call me out for being a Disney adult all the time, but I am very happy that I spend a lot of time down in Disney World. I'm very excited for this Disney IP, even though I have to argue with people about who Sergeant Tibbs is. Mostly my husband. I hope that as a card gaming community, we've kind of moved past the distrustful nature toward women in card gaming, so that as these new women are coming into these events, we can welcome them and we can build. It would be really nice to see more women in card game events, and it would be really nice to see a more diverse crowd in card game events. So in order for more women to feel comfortable going to competitive events, more women just to really get their foot in the door, here are my top however many tips to really get women in the door for card gaming, especially competitively. The first thing I want to say is please, if you have the ability, now I say this as someone on the East Coast, so it's really, really easy for me to say. I have at least 4 stores within an easy driving distance. But if you have that ability and you go to one store and you find out the vibe there is not really what you were going for, or maybe they do some of the things that I talked about earlier in the video, shop around stores. Not just saying for who has the best prices on product, shop around which groups and which communities you would feel comfortable playing in on a weekly or bi-weekly or however frequently you can get to the store basis. One store might have a more welcoming crowd, and that's okay if you feel like it would be better to gravitate toward the more welcoming crowd. If you go to a store and you sense that it's not that welcoming, or they treat you a little differently than you feel that you should be treated, shop around, try to go to another store. I admit, like I said, that's easy for me because I live close to a lot of game stores. But I think the more you look around the communities, you'll be able to find people local to you that are able to welcome you with open arms into card gaming. Another thing to be wary of as a woman, and another tip, is that as you are playing opponents, they have a tendency to use more intimidation techniques against women than they would against other men. Example of that, I had one opponent who would flip his cards, which we know is both a tick, but it's also a intimidation event, much more with me than against any of my opponents. I've also seen people do that with other people. This was not a Lorcana person. This was years ago. Some opponents may have a tendency to try to intimidate you more, either by talking about all the wonderful things that they have done more to you than they would to their other opponents. There are a lot of intimidation techniques that get used, especially against women, but also against any new player. So be wary of those. Take a breath. You are not in charge of their nonsense. And that was something that I really had to learn. I would get really nervous thinking, oh, I'm inconveniencing this person because I'm taking a minute to think about what I want to do. Now, don't slow play, but also take a breath. You're allowed to do what you need for yourself. I know this sounds ridiculous and self-helpy, but it really is, especially for me, something that I had to get over, thinking I'm allowed to take this time for myself. I don't have to make my opponent feel nice about themselves. And that's something that a lot of women have to rewrite for themselves in any aspect, not just card gaming. Another tip that I have for women, especially when you go to bigger events, is if you are able to and you have friends who are also going, it doesn't hurt to have a posse. And that's really only if you can, and that's fine if you can. If you want to go by yourself, I've done events by myself, but it feels nice to have a posse, especially ones that are able to build you up and also hype you up to other players. That felt really great. I had one acquaintance that I knew, one friend from another store, who anytime anyone gave me nonsense, he was there immediately to shut it down, and that was at a few national level events. Now, that's not something that's going to happen right away if you don't know anybody, but one thing I will say about gamers is if you can find a clique or a group, or if you can find even 1 or 2 people that you really mesh with, they are really good at sticking up for each other. Now, granted, you're going to rib each other a lot. You are going to be competing against each other. I can't tell you the number of events. I was actually really excited for Lorcana that I was not up against Scott Landis, because everything else I almost always end up against Landis at some point in time. It's nice to have a group that recognizes your gaming ability and are willing to stand up for you to other people. Or at least cold shoulder people who are going to cause nonsense or drama. It's also nice to have a group because if you're really hungry, you can go send them out for food, but that might just be my remembering being 6 months pregnant while gaming conversation to bring it back to the beginning. Yeah, so those are my top 3 tips if you are able to do those as a woman on the competitive scene. I'm not going to give you tips about deck building or things like that today, but I just wanted to address this as a woman who has been a competitive player, who hopes to be a competitive player again, I wanted to address both for the card game scene in general and for other women who might be hoping to enter Lorcana who might be a little nervous. I wanted to address some of the things that I've seen in the past, but how enthusiastic I am for the future, especially of this card game, because I do believe that this will be an incredibly welcoming community, and I believe that women can succeed as card gamers for Lorcana.